Yo, what's going on, people? It's your boy Ape Huncho, and this is Brits on Death Row. Brits on Death Row is a limited series where we take a look at some British nationals that are either currently on death row, or potentially facing death row, have died on death row, or have had their death row sentence overturned. And I've explained this in previous episodes, but if you didn't know, here in the UK the death penalty or capital punishment was abolished in 1965, but remained for certain crimes such as treason all the way up until 1998. And seeing as the majority of these cases we're going to be taking a look at happened after 1998, that would mean only one thing: the British nationals who we'll be taking a look at are either on death row, facing death row, have died on death row, or had their death row sentence overturned in foreign countries. And today we'll be taking a look at the Lindsay Sandiford case, the British grandma drug smuggler who's currently on death row in Indonesia. Lindsay Sandiford, born June 25th, 1956, is originally from Redcar, Teesside, North Yorkshire, miles from death row in Indonesia. She worked for many years in management at Cheltenham-based law firm DTS Legal, and even appeared in the House of Lords before the Clerk of the Parliament. The House of Lords, for my American viewers, is basically the equivalent to the Senate. Of course, there are many differences, but to give you a somewhat comparison, its close equivalent would be that of the Senate. Explaining the brief details of her past life, Lindsay would go on to explain that she owned a flat in the 1990s which overlooked the Thames, and here she lived with her ex-husband and their two sons, Lewis and Elliot. They were together for around 15 years, but like we've seen time and time again, people drift apart and they go in different directions in life, which is exactly what happened between Lindsay and her husband. In 1997, they both got a divorce, although this wasn't on bad grounds, and again in a blog which I do believe was written in 2015, she claimed up until that point they were still fairly close with each other. Either way though, after the divorce, she moved to Cheltenham with the boys, where they rented a house. Years later, when the boys both finished school, Lindsay said she took a trip to India. It was only supposed to be a short holiday, but she said that she fell in love with the country, so decided that she wanted to stay. Although according to reports from the media, she was described as a neighbour from hell, and a next door neighbour said that she was evicted for failing to pay rent. They said that she wasn't a nice person and caused a lot of trouble where she lived, and definitely wasn't a normal housewife. Another neighbour also said that the house was always disorganised, with rubbish all over the front garden, adding there were never any curtains in the window, and even one time there was a great big hole in the front window. They continued, "It struck me as a not very happy house, if you know what I mean. It's what I would call disorganised. There was always people coming around, and I saw the police parked outside a few times." Whether the neighbours were telling the truth in the fact that she got evicted, or Lindsay, in her own words, had a short holiday and eventually moved to India, this is what she ended up doing, and she started making money by making shawls and jewellery, and she'd sell them on her frequent trips back to England or via friends' shops located in India. At some point in early 2012, her youngest son Elliot was said to have relocated to Brighton, and here Lindsay alleges that he got caught up with the wrong crowd, and supposedly he was targeted by antiques restorer Julian Ponder, who was originally from Brighton but had relocated to Bali. Julian will become a key figure as the story progresses, so just keep that one in mind. Although sources within the antiques world claim that they never heard of his name floating about, it's believed that across the UK, if you're known in the industry, then you're known. Antiques restorer or not though, Lindsay claims that Julian Ponder was involved in an international drug syndicate and had threatened to harm Elliot unless she was to carry out a job for him. It was believed that Elliot had become a target because there was a disagreement over rent money that Lindsay had paid on his behalf, which, looking at a previous history of allegedly getting evicted for not paying rent, wouldn't be too hard to believe. On the 17th of May 2012, Lindsay Sandiford would go ahead with this job and allegedly travels to Thailand to a hotel in Bangkok, where she goes to meet Julian Ponder's partner Rachel Dougal and a man known as Paul Beals. At the meet, she agrees to take the job, which would be to courier near enough 5 kilograms of cocaine from Thailand to Bali. At that time, around 2012, the rough estimate of the value of the drugs would have been around £1.7 million. And after the job was complete, this is where she claims her family wouldn't be targeted by this drug syndicate anymore. Rachel Dougal allegedly owned the cocaine that was needed to be smuggled, whilst Paul Beals was said to have sewn it into a suitcase, and it's believed she was to deliver the cocaine to Julian Ponders upon arrival in Bali. Again, I just want to say this has all been alleged by Lindsay Sandiford. What happens after the meet is unclear, but if you could take a wild guess, you could go on to say that Lindsay was more than likely having a day to really let this sink in, that she is about to do this because, of course, as you guys know, the maximum penalty for smuggling drugs into Indonesia is death. So the big day would be 2 days after the meet on the 19th of May 2012, and Lindsay took a Thai Airways flight from Bangkok to Bali's Nuarai International Airport, or as some people know it as Denpasar Airport. Although successful at getting through Thai security with a suitcase full of cocaine, the same couldn't be said for when she landed in Bali, because if you didn't guess it by now, when Lindsay landed, she would collect her bag from the carousel, and as she was just a few feet away from the arrivals hall, all was looking clear. She placed the bag through an x-ray machine, and it was here a customs officer had told her to come over and asked her to collect the bag from the machine. She followed orders, and they asked her if she had a key, to which she replied yes. The customs officer then went through the bag. He went straight to the false bottom. Here the cocaine stash had been found, and Lindsay said he knew exactly what he was looking for.
British woman arrested for smuggling cocaine in Bali has claimed she was forced to carry the drugs because her children were being threatened. Lindsay Sandiford, a 55-year-old housewife, could face a death penalty, although police say her help in a major drug sting operation, which led to 4 other arrests, could lead to a lighter sentence if she's found guilty. A warning Carl Dillon's report does contain flash photography.
Lindsay Sandiford allegedly told police she got involved in drug smuggling because her grown-up sons had been threatened back in the UK.
Lindsay, were your children threatened? Is that why you had to carry the drugs? Lindsay?
Yesterday, the Indonesian authorities had presented Lindsay Sandiford to the media. She arrived in Bali from Thailand 10 days ago.
These people not keep me safe.
Tersangka, it says by her name, the accused. Police and customs officers claim she had these blocks of cocaine hidden inside her suitcase. They publicly tested and weighed the drugs. The conclusion, 4.79 kilos of coke worth £1.6 million. But the story doesn't end with Lindsay Sandiford. Police in Bali claim that after her arrest, she helped them to catch more of the alleged drugs gang.
Mrs. Lindsay finally very cooperative with us. She tell everything.
The others were also paraded in front of the cameras, but with their faces hidden by masks. They are 3 Britons and an Indian. The Indonesians say they are part of a major international drug smuggling syndicate. The other Britons in the case say they have been set up. They are understood to be Rachel Dougal, her partner Julian Ponder,
good international lawyer, fit up,
and a man called Paul Beals. For all 5 accused, the stakes are high. The penalty for drug smuggling in Indonesia is death by firing squad.
So the timeline skipped a bit forward, so let's just rewind a tiny bit even before the whole gang got arrested, and let's take a look into Julian Ponder, his partner Rachel Dougal, and Paul Beals. Now, as we know, Julian Ponder was originally from Brighton, and so was his partner Rachel Dougal, but they had both relocated to Bali with their daughter 4 years prior in 2008. The pair were described as the king and queen of Bali by locals because they had an extremely wealthy lifestyle, renting a £4,000 a month villa, and even had household staff. The house staff would go on to tell reporters that they never mentioned or revealed what they did for work, and there was an air of mystery that surrounded them. In regards to their daily lives, it was said they would spend their days behind the walls of their villa with a swimming pool, and locals said they gave the impression of being like a king and queen in their castle, whilst everybody else was just poor people who they'd smile and wave to now and then, hence the nickname the King and Queen of Bali. Villagers Officers also said they rarely went out, so they was confused as to how they could afford living in this expensive villa. And after they got arrested, which we'll get into in a minute, they said it definitely made sense that they would have been involved in some kind of drug syndicate. Now remember at the start of the video how I was explaining there was doubt that Julian Ponder was an antiques restorer? Well, it was Rachel Dougal's father, Barry Dougal, who actually came out to say that he was very doubtful that Julian was in the antiques industry. Although it should be noted that public record states that he ran an antiques restoration business called Penn Productions Limited for 10 years till 2008, where of course they relocated to Bali. So it isn't looking great for the pair. For one, you've got the local villagers coming out to say the pair live like royalty, living in a very expensive villa, and then Rachel's own father comes out to say that Julian isn't known for running a successful antiques restoration business in Brighton, which would realistically mean one thing: either they have a very successful business that no one knows about, or they're involved in some kind of illegal business, and with the theme of the video, you would more than likely say a drug syndicate. The only thing that's really known about Paul Beals is that he was previously a property developer, originally from Milton Keynes, and had been living in Bali for 15 years prior to 2012, with his Indonesian girlfriend who he had 2 children with. The only link that's connected between Paul Beals, Julian Ponder and Rachel Dougal is that they're all originally from the United Kingdom and all now live in Bali, unless they were all a part of this alleged drug syndicate, and again that would make the 3 connected. Either way, let's fast forward the timeline and we go back to the 19th of May 2012. Lindsay Sandiford has just been arrested after being found with nearly 5 kilograms of cocaine, and she's taken to the holding cells in the airport. On her blog, Lindsay explains her first 2 nights in those cells, where she says, "They wouldn't let me sleep. They were banging on the windows and door and screaming, 'No reclining, no reclining.' Then 2 men came in who I'd never seen before and told me that I'd get the death penalty for what I'd done. One of them pulled out a black gun and held it against my head. He said, 'Pull the trigger,' and he kicked his chair across the room. It was a white tiled floor and it was a metal fold-up chair. He kicked it across the room and it cracked against the wall. I can hear the sound right now. I thought he'd shot me. I'll never forget that man's face, and he's always in my nightmares." After 2 nights of interrogation, Lindsay would agree to cooperate with law enforcement to bring down this alleged drug syndicate after she explained her story of her son Elliot being threatened by the gang, although it was originally reported that it was both of her sons. She said that she wanted to bring the syndicate down in the bids that she would be offered a more lenient sentence as she was a drugs mule, and she claimed that officials told her if she helped out, then her sons would be out of harm's way. One local newspaper reported the operation and said Lindsay Sandiford confessed that she was to meet Rachel Dougal in their initial plan, and Rachel asked Lindsay to stay at the Kamala Hotel in Kuta. However, the hotel was full on May the 21st, so she stayed in the Nusantara Hotel, which is located in front of the Kamala Hotel. On May 22nd, 2012, Rachel asked Lindsay to move to the Lumbung Duma Bhutan Villa, where Julian Ponder was to take drugs from Lindsay. On May 25th, Julian came to the villa to meet Lindsay, and soon after, when the drugs were passed over, police would swarm in and everyone would go on to be arrested. The team of around 20 police and customs officials made the arrests, but Julian's lawyer would later go on to say that Lindsay said that she was dropping off a present for a 6-year-old daughter, and he felt like he had been trapped by her and that she was trying to drag him and his partner Rachel into what had been going on. He would eventually go on to be charged for selling or facilitating the sale of more than 5 grams of drugs and drugs possession. Rachel would also go on to be charged with failing to report the crime of possessing drugs and of drugs possession. Paul Beals was arrested 1 day later, and he would go on to be charged with selling or facilitating the sale of more than 5 grams of drugs and possession of drugs. After their arrests, head of Bali's Customs and Excise Agency Monitoring Division, Wade Wayana, said that they were seeking the toughest possible penalty for Lindsay, but were not looking to seek the death penalty because she had helped the police out, adding the main reason we're seeking out this sentence is because narcotics can massively endanger the young, and thus whoever's caught with drugs should be severely punished. Adding if 3 people can consume 1 gram of cocaine, then this operation has potentially saved up to 14,000 lives. Officials went on to say though, for the others involved, the death penalty may be applicable. Head of Bali Police's narcotics unit, Commander Moyadi, said, "For over a week we conducted a controlled drug delivery through the suspect suspect, Lindsay Sandiford, to uncover a drug ring. It's an international network controlled from abroad. Adding, in separate drug raids, an additional 68 grams of cocaine, 280 grams of powdered ecstasy, and a small amount of hashish were seized. But only 3 grams of hashish was linked to Paul, 23 grams of cocaine were linked to Julian, and 50 grams of cocaine was linked to Rachel. So a quick roundup: Lindsay Sandiford, alongside Julian Ponder, his partner Rachel Dougal, and Paul Beals were arrested in connection with this international drug syndicate and for the importation of 4.7 kilograms of cocaine into Bali. Lindsay, Julian and Paul were charged with selling or facilitating the sale of more than 5 grams of drugs. Julian would also go on to be charged for possession of cocaine. Paul would also go on to be charged with possession of hashish. Rachel would go on to be charged with failing to report the crime of possessing drugs and of drugs possession. So a trial was to go ahead towards the end of 2012, and after doing quite literally days of research, searching the internet far and wide for in-depth court details, unfortunately I couldn't find that many. All we know is, in regards to Paul Beals, the prosecution alleged that although charged with possession of hashish and taking part in the selling or facilitating of more than 5 grams of drugs, the prosecution said that he was not considered to be a main player in the case, and as a result, they wasn't seeking the death penalty for him. In regards to Rachel Dougal, the prosecution said in a police raid at her villa, they found a cigarette package containing nearly 50 grams of cocaine in a bag, but said no evidence was found that linked Rachel to the drug syndicate. Going into a bit more detail about the incident itself, Customs Officer Christian Septu Nahara told the court that when he showed the drugs to Lindsay, she appeared shocked, as if she wasn't aware of the contents of the package, adding that Lindsay said at the time she knew nothing about the cocaine. In her defence, Dr. Jennifer Fleetwood, who's a specialist on women's involvement in the international drugs trade, told the court that Lindsay Sandiford was subjected into coercion by one or more parties over a period of time, which left her to be stopped at the airport, where she would eventually act as a mule for drug smuggling. Dr. Fleetwood said that Lindsay Sandiford's clean criminal record confirms that she's never been involved in any other form of crime, and this backed her testimony of a hopeless mother attempting to save her family from harm's way by agreeing to act as a drugs mule. In an expert report submitted to the court, Dr. Fleetwood concluded that Lindsay's vulnerability would have made her an ideal target for drugs traffickers, noting that there's evidence to suggest that a trafficker would seek someone who was vulnerable. Dr. Fleetwood added, having reviewed extracts from Lindsay's medical records, I know that Lindsay has a history of mental health issues. This may have unfortunately made her an attractive target for threats, manipulation and coercion. In a witness statement written by Lindsay and submitted to the court, she apologised to the Republic of Indonesia and the Indonesian people for her involvement, adding, I would never have become involved in something like this, but the lives of my children were in danger and I felt I had to protect them. Again, in regards to a statement from Lindsay, that was all that was ever released to the public, because only extracts were actually given. Another statement that was read out to the court, again only an extract was given to reporters, was actually from her son Elliot, and he went on to say, I love my mother very much and have a very close relationship with her. I know that she would do anything to protect me. I cannot imagine what I'd do if she was sentenced to death in relation to these charges. In regards to Julian Ponder, the only information is that he's thought to have been the mastermind behind the drug syndicate, but his lawyer argued that in turn he was set up by Lindsay Sandiford after she claimed to bring a gift round for his daughter's birthday, but instead handed him drugs. After weeks on trial and not too much information actually being out to the public, it seemed as if the prosecution's case against the alleged drug syndicate was crumbling, because they couldn't actually find any physical evidence to connect Lindsay with the other 3 suspects, with a key part of evidence being conversations between Rachel and Lindsay being carried out through a mobile phone, but the police had failed to retrieve a SIM card during a raid on Rachel's villa. This meant that eventually Rachel would go on to be found guilty of failing to report the crime of possessing drugs, and she was sentenced to just 1 year in prison. Paul Beals would also go on to be cleared of the bigger charges, but was sentenced to 4 years for hashish possession.
Demikian yang bisa Berapa
Waiting for me, huh?
Do you have any comment about your sentence?
No, I don't understand. Are you happy? No comment, mate. No, sorry.
So with the prosecution's case falling apart, this wasn't looking great for Lindsay Sandiford, and eventually she would go on to be found guilty for her involvement of the smuggling of the cocaine into Bali. Now originally, if you remember, the prosecution requested that Lindsay face 15 years behind bars for her involvement in the incident, and one day before her sentencing day, her defence team pleaded that 15 should be reduced even lower because they were sticking to the story that she had been pressured into moving the cocaine. But again, I just want to emphasise that even though their case had pretty much fallen apart, they were still saying that Lindsay was to be jailed for 15 years. This is what would happen at a sentencing hearing.
Just moments ago, judges in Bali delivered a death sentence for the 56-year-old British housewife Lindsay Sandiford. Now, I have to say that this verdict has come as a bit of a surprise for many people here. There was an audible gasp when it was read out in the courtroom, and that's because the prosecutors had actually asked for a 15-year sentence for Mrs. Sandiford. Remember, the maximum penalty under Indonesian law for this crime is death, but the prosecution had said that they'd taken into consideration a variety of factors, including Mrs. Sandiford's age, and they had decided just to ask for 15 years. Now, the judges, as they read out this verdict, said there were no mitigating factors that they would be able to take into consideration. They also added that Mrs. Sandiford didn't appear to care about the repercussions of her actions.
After going against the prosecution's request of 15 years, the judge said Lindsay had damaged the image of Bali as a tourist destination and weakened the government's anti-drug program, and they found no reason to lighten her sentence. And so she was handed the death sentence, going against the prosecution's request of only 15 years. The judge's colleague on the panel said their decision had been influenced by several factors, including what they viewed as Lindsay's lack of remorse. So we then move on to Julian Ponder, and things were looking up for him after everybody else had been sentenced. Again, he was cleared of the bigger charge, but was found guilty of possession of 23 grams of cocaine.
The defendant, Julian Ponder, has been proven legally and convincingly guilty of owning, storing and in possession of 23 grams of cocaine, and the court sentences the defendant to 6 years in prison.
So with everyone in the case pretty much getting a slap on the wrist after the prosecution's case had pretty much crumbled, and Lindsay getting put on death row after the prosecution requested 15 years, this sent shockwaves across the world, and there was outrage in the United Kingdom, because at the end of the day, if the prosecution has asked for 15 years and the judges basically said, no, we're going to sentence her to death, you can see where the outrage was. Now, at the time, this was a massive story and there was a lot of backing for Lindsay, but eventually, as she went through the appeal stages, trying to fight this decision made by the court, she didn't have no money left, and so a fundraising campaign was made, and they actually raised enough money to fly an Indonesian solicitor to Bali, but her appeal was dismissed. So then she moved it on to the Indonesian Supreme Court, but this appeal was also rejected, and so for Lindsay Sandiford in 2020, she sees herself currently sitting on death row in Indonesia. It was reported in 2019 that after spending 6 years on death row at that point, Lindsay said that she just wanted the guards to get on with it and kill her, and until that day comes though, she teaches inmates on how to knit, and that's how she passes her time at Kerawakan prison, where she currently sits on death row for the importation of nearly 5 kilograms of cocaine. In 2015, a total of 14 people, including foreigners from across the world, were killed for drug-related crimes in Bali, but since then, and we're coming up to near enough 6 years now, no one has been put to death via firing squad in Bali, because if you didn't know, in Indonesia the way that they actually kill people and put them to death is by firing squad. But this case is a bit of a tricky one to go through because, of course, not that many court details were actually given to reporters, so we can't see specifically why the prosecution's case had collapsed pretty much and why Lindsay is currently sitting on death row. What I do want to say is, in my own personal opinion, is where does Lindsay Sandiford, a grandma from the United Kingdom, pull out 5 kilograms of cocaine from? And if you use logic, why would Lindsay Sandiford have not named the actual people who she got the drugs from. I don't understand how Julian Ponder, Rachel Dougal and Paul Beals got away with it, and Lindsay Sandiford, the drug mule, has been put on death row. It doesn't really make sense. I'm trying to understand, but because I don't have the full court details, I can't really see why that would happen. But if you like this series, give the video a thumbs up. Let me know what you guys think of this down in the comment section below. And if you want the latest drill, street and music news out of the UK, be sure to hit the subscribe button and the notification bell. It's been your boy Huncho, and I'm out.